Why is Ireland divided? And who actually decided that? Right now, on one small island in the North Atlantic, there are two separate countries. One is an independent republic, the other is still part of the United Kingdom. They share the same land, the same rain, the same green hills, but a border cuts between them that has caused more grief, more bloodshed, and more bitter argument than almost any other line drawn on a map in the 20th century. And most people have absolutely no idea how it got there. Some will tell you Ireland was always divided. It wasn't. Some say it was inevitable. It wasn't. Some say the English did it out of pure spite. That's too simple. And some will tell you it was a fair compromise. That's even further from the truth. The real story is older, messier, and far more gripping than any of those takes. It runs through Viking raids, colonial plantations, a famine that wiped out a quarter of the population, a revolution, a civil war, and 30 years of urban conflict that shocked the entire world. And it is not over. Not even close. This is the full, unfiltered history, from the ancient kingdoms of Gaelic Ireland all the way to the fragile, contested peace that exists today. No sides taken, no history skipped. Just the truth of how one island became two, why it happened, and what it means for the world we are living in right now. By the end of this video, you will not just know what happened, you will understand why it still matters. Let's go back to the very beginning, ancient Ireland, before the conquest. To understand why Ireland is divided today, you have to go back to a time when there was no division at all. No border. No outside power telling anyone what to do. Just an island full of people who had built their own world, completely on their own terms. These were the Gaelic Irish. Celtic people divided into dozens of small kingdoms, each ruled by its own king, constantly competing for land and power. At the top sat the idea of a High King of Ireland, one ruler over all the rest. In theory, organized. In practice, almost always messy. Their legal system was called Bran law. It covered property, rights, and social order. Women had more legal protections under it than in most of Europe for centuries afterward. This was a fully functioning civilization with its own culture, language, and deep sense of identity. Then in the 5th century, Christianity arrived through a man named Patrick. Not Irish by birth. He was actually kidnapped from Roman Britain as a teenager and brought over as a slave. He escaped, went home, then felt called to return. Within a few generations, Ireland had become one of the most devoutly Christian places in the world. Monasteries became centers of learning, while much of Europe was falling apart. This period is known as the Golden Age of Ireland. Then the Vikings arrived in the late 700s. They came first as raiders, attacking monasteries and disappearing fast. But over time they stayed, built settlements, and those settlements grew into the cities we know today. Dublin, Cork, Waterford, Limerick. Ireland absorbed them and moved on. By 1169, though, something far more consequential arrived. A Norman lord called Strongbow landed on the southeast coast, invited by an Irish king who simply needed help in a local dispute. That king thought he was getting an ally. What he actually did was open a door that would never close again. The English crown declared itself Lord of Ireland, and from that moment, Ireland's story was never entirely its own again. The clock had started ticking. Colonization and the plantation era. For a few centuries after the Normans arrived, English control over Ireland was actually quite limited. It mostly stayed around a small area near Dublin called the Pale. Everything beyond it remained largely Gaelic. In fact, the Normans who had settled in Ireland started speaking Irish, marrying into Irish families, and living like the Irish. There was even a saying at the time that they had become more Irish than the Irish themselves. That changed dramatically when Henry VIII came to power in England. Henry did not just want influence over Ireland, he wanted total control. In 1541, he declared himself King of Ireland, not just Lord, and demanded that Irish chieftains give up their Gaelic titles and pledge loyalty to the English crown. Some did. Many refused. The resistance that followed was fierce. The biggest challenge came during the Nine Years' War from 1593 to 1603, where Irish chieftains led by Hugh O'Neill came closer than anyone ever had to pushing English power out of Ireland completely. They lost, and when they lost, it was final. In 1607, the most powerful Gaelic lords left Ireland and never came back. This moment is called the Flight of the Earls, and it is one of the most significant moments in Irish history. With the native leadership gone, the English crown moved quickly. They confiscated millions of acres of land in Ulster, the northern province of Ireland, and handed it to Protestant settlers brought over from Scotland and England. This was called the Plantation of Ulster. Native Irish families were removed from land their ancestors had lived on for generations and replaced by strangers with a different religion, a different language, and direct loyalty to the English crown. This is where the roots of modern Northern Ireland are buried. The settlers stayed. They built communities. They passed their identity down through generations. And the native Irish, pushed to the margins of their own land, never forgot what had been taken from them. That tension never went away. It just kept building. Rebellion, famine, and the push for independence. By the 1700s, Ireland was firmly under British control. But control does not mean acceptance. Underneath the surface, anger was building, and it was only a matter of time before it exploded. The first major explosion came in 1798. A group called the United Irishmen, led by a man named Wolfe Tone, launched a rebellion against British rule. What made this movement unusual was that it was not purely Catholic or purely Protestant. Tone himself was Protestant. The dream was a united Irish republic where religion did not matter. The rebellion failed, crushed by British forces with considerable violence. But the idea it represented never died. 3 years later, in 1801, Britain passed the Act of Union, formally absorbing Ireland into the United Kingdom. Ireland lost its own parliament. All decisions would now be made in London. Then came the event that scarred Ireland more deeply than anything else in its history: the Great Famine. Between 1845 and 1852, a disease destroyed the potato crop, which was the primary food source for millions of Irish people. 1 million people died of starvation and disease. Another million emigrated just to survive, and the British government's response was widely seen as indifferent at best and deliberately cruel at worst. Food was actually being exported out of Ireland while people were dying in the streets. The famine did not just kill people, it killed whatever remaining goodwill existed toward British rule. It radicalized a generation and created a massive Irish diaspora abroad, particularly in America, that would fund and support Irish independence movements for decades to come. By the late 1800s, the push for home rule, basically self-governance within the British Empire, was gaining serious momentum. But it kept getting blocked. And with each blocked attempt, more people concluded that peaceful politics was not enough. The stage was being set for something much bigger: partition. How Ireland was divided by the early 1900s, Ireland was at a breaking point. The patience for gradual political change had run out for many people. In 1916, a small group of Irish rebels seized key buildings in Dublin on Easter Monday and declared an independent Irish republic. The Easter Rising, as it became known, was militarily crushed within a week. The leaders were arrested and executed one by British authorities. That decision to execute them was a massive mistake. Before the executions, much of the Irish public had actually been unsympathetic to the Rising. It had caused disruption and destruction in their city. But watching the leaders get shot one after another turned public opinion completely. Martyrs are far more powerful than rebels. Within 2 years, the political party Sinn Féin swept the 1918 elections in Ireland, declared an independent parliament, and Ireland's War of Independence began. By 1921, Britain was ready to negotiate. The resulting Anglo-Irish Treaty ended the war, but came with a condition that would define everything that followed. Ireland would be partitioned. The 26 southern counties would become the Irish Free State. The 6 northern counties, where Protestant Unionists were the majority, would remain part of the United Kingdom as Northern Ireland. The border was not drawn by accident. It was deliberately designed to create a Protestant Unionist majority inside Northern Ireland, ensuring it would stay British. The treaty split the Irish independence movement right down the middle. Those who accepted it saw it as the best deal available. Those who rejected it saw it as a betrayal. That disagreement led directly to the Irish Civil War, a brutal conflict between former allies that left wounds in Irish society lasting generations. Meanwhile, in Northern Ireland, the new state was built in a way that systematically favored the Protestant Unionist community over the Catholic nationalist minority in housing, employment, and voting rights. The division was complete, but it was anything but settled. Thing but the Troubles, a conflict the world watched. By the 1960s, Catholic nationalists in Northern Ireland had been living as second-class citizens for decades. They faced discrimination in housing, in jobs, and in voting. Entire systems had been built to keep them at the bottom. And they had had enough. Inspired by the civil rights movement happening in America, Irish Catholics began marching and organizing, demanding basic equality. Their protests were met with violence from both the state and from loyalist mobs. The world started paying attention. Then in August 1969, things completely fell apart. Serious violence broke out in Belfast and Derry. Houses were burned, people were killed. The British Army was deployed onto the streets of Northern Ireland, initially welcomed by some Catholics who hoped they would provide protection. That goodwill evaporated quickly. On the 30th of January 1972, British soldiers shot 26 unarmed civilians during a peaceful protest march in Derry. 14 of them died. That day became known as Bloody Sunday, and it is one of the most defining moments in the entire conflict. It did not just shock the world, it filled a generation of young Irish Catholics with a rage that the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, was very ready to channel. The IRA launched a campaign of bombings and shootings targeting British forces, politicians, and infrastructure. Loyalist paramilitary groups responded with their own campaign of violence targeting Catholics. The British Army was in the middle, and its own actions frequently made everything worse. Northern Ireland became a war zone that most people outside the region watched on the news with a mixture of horror and confusion. Over 30 years, more than 3,500 people were killed. Thousands more were injured, traumatized, and displaced. Whole communities were sealed off behind walls. Children grew up knowing nothing but conflict. It could not go on forever, but it took a very long time to stop. Peace. The Good Friday Agreement and its legacy. By the late 1980s, something was becoming clear to almost everyone involved. Nobody was winning. The IRA could not bomb Britain into leaving Northern Ireland. The British government could not simply crush the Republican movement out of existence. The violence was just cycling endlessly, producing more grief, more anger, and more reasons for the next generation to keep fighting. Quietly, carefully, back-channel conversations began. It took years. There were false starts, broken ceasefires, and moments where the whole process looked like it was falling apart completely. But in 1994, the IRA declared a ceasefire. Loyalist paramilitaries followed. And for the first time in decades, people in Northern Ireland could walk through their own cities without wondering if today was the day something terrible would happen. The negotiations that followed were extraordinarily difficult. Every word mattered. Every compromise felt like a betrayal to somebody. But on Good Friday, the 10th of April 1998, an agreement was reached. The Good Friday Agreement, also called the Belfast Agreement, was signed by the British and Irish governments and by the major political parties of Northern Ireland. What did it actually say? It created a power-sharing government in Northern Ireland where Unionists and Nationalists would govern together. It established bodies for cross-border cooperation between Northern Ireland and the Republic. It committed to the early release of paramilitary prisoners. And crucially, it stated that the future of Northern Ireland would be decided by the democratic consent of its people. It was not a perfect document. It left many things deliberately vague. But it worked. The guns largely went silent. However, peace is not the same as resolution. The border question returned dramatically when Britain voted to leave the European Union in 2016. Because for years, the open border between Northern Ireland and the Republic had helped the peace feel normal. Brexit threatened to change that, and the arguments that followed showed just how fragile the foundations still are. The agreement holds, but only just. Conclusion. So here we are. More than 1,000 years of history compressed into one island that is still figuring out what it wants to be. The Good Friday Agreement brought peace, and that is not a small thing. For people who grew up during the Troubles, the ability to simply live a normal life without checkpoints, bombs, and sectarian violence is genuinely extraordinary. An entire generation has grown up in Northern Ireland without knowing that world, and that matters enormously. But peace is not the same as a solution. The questions that caused all of this are still sitting on the table. Northern Ireland is still part of the United Kingdom. The Republic of Ireland is still a separate country. And the community divide that the plantation of Ulster created over 400 years ago is still very much present in everyday life. In many parts of Northern Ireland, Catholics and Protestants still live in separate neighborhoods, attend separate schools, and socialize in separate spaces. The walls that were built during the Troubles to separate communities, the so-called peace walls, are still standing. Many of them are still locked at night. And then there is the bigger question that more and more people are asking openly now. Should Ireland be reunited? For Irish nationalists and Republicans, reunification is the unfinished business of history. It is the natural conclusion of everything that has happened since 1169. For Ulster Unionists, remaining part of the United Kingdom is not just a political preference. It is their identity, their culture, and their community. It is everything they are. Both of those feelings are real, and both of them deserve to be taken seriously. What has changed is the demographics. Catholics now make up a larger share of the Northern Ireland population than at any point since partition. Sinn Féin, the party that wants a united Ireland, is now the largest party in the Northern Ireland Assembly. Polls show growing support for reunification, particularly among younger people. A border poll, a referendum on Irish unity, feels less like a distant possibility and more like an approaching reality. But a vote is only the beginning of a conversation, not the end of one. What would a united Ireland actually look like? How would it work? How would the Unionist community, who have built their entire identity around being British, find their place in it? These are not simple questions, and anyone who tells you they are is not being honest with you. What history tells us is this: the decisions made by powerful people in distant rooms have consequences that last for centuries. The plantation of Ulster was a political decision made in the 1600s. The partition of Ireland was a political decision made in 1921. Ordinary people on this island have been living with the consequences of both ever since. Whatever happens next, the people of Ireland, North and South, deserve to be the ones who decide it. Not because of what happened 1,000 years ago, or 500 years ago, or even 100 years ago, but because it is their home. It always was. That is the real history of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And as you can see, it is far from finished. If this video gave you a new perspective on any of this, drop a comment below. Do you think a united Ireland will happen in your lifetime? I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you want to go deeper on any part of this history, let me know which section you want me to cover in full detail. See you in the next one.